Hola a todos, soy Javier Poveda y esto es de Bien TV, el canal en el que te la vas a pasar tú de bien mientras aprendes geografía, historia e historia del arte. El vídeo de hoy va dirigido a mis alumnos de primero de la ESO de sección del IES Niel Armstrong de Valdemoro. So today in this video we are going to finish the last unit of the book, the last unit of the course, which is Unit 8, Environmental Problems. So this is our last theory video. Yes. So we are going to talk about the Earth as an ecosystem, its characteristics, the main environmental problems that affect the Earth or the Earth ecosystem, and the measures which are being taken in order to prevent them. So let's go to the presentation with no. Well, this is the presentation of the Unit 8 environmental problems, and we are going to start talking about the Earth as an ecosystem. So we have to know that people, animals, and plants who live in a particular place interact with each other and with the world around them. And these interactions constitute an ecosystem. This is meant to be an ecosystem, un ecosistema. The biosphere, which is part of this ecosystem, consists of all the living things on the planet. Okay, all the things that have life, that live, are meant to be the biosphere, and this biosphere have three main groups. The first one is the vegetation, which is at the center of these relationships between living things. So the plants, the vegetation we can find in an ecosystem, depend on the climate. If you remember all the climates that we have been studying, each climate has a specific type of vegetation. Okay, so climate determines the vegetation that we can find in these areas. But the plants also influence the quantity of water vapor in the atmosphere. Remember the transpiration in the water cycle? This is it. Vegetation also absorbs water and nutrients from the soil with the roots, okay, las raíces. And it is food for animals and people because we eat plants and the animals eat plants. And when vegetation decomposes, when they die, these nutrients return to the soil, okay? Then we have the wildlife, what we call in Spanish la fauna. They can live on land or in water and feeds on plants and animals. The animals eat the plants and eat other animals. There are complex relationships between species, which is called the food chain, because some animals eat some smaller animals, and these animals are eaten as well as bigger animals, and so on. If you have watched the wonderful movie The Lion King of Disney, this is called the cycle of life. At the beginning, if you have not seen this movie, you should. And finally, people, the human beings, and we are the third group of the biosphere, and people alter relationships between living things, and we alter this relationship significantly. The human activity has transformed the planet. We have seen that in the previous units, and in many cases this has put the balance of the ecosystem at risk because the nature usually balances the ecosystem, okay? But the human beings, we alter it very significantly, and sometimes this ecosystem cannot return to its balanced state. So let's talk now about hazards and disasters. A hazard is something that can be dangerous for living things. It's what we call in Spanish un riesgo. And these hazards can be natural or can be caused by human activity. Among the natural hazards, we have these four ones, which are the most important ones, and they become natural disasters. They are called natural disasters, these natural hazards, when human life is affected. So what are the main ones? First, the earthquakes. If you remember, we talked about earthquakes, I think in Unit 3. And the effects of earthquakes are more devastating in poor countries with fewer resources because they cannot prevent them as well as we can do. Then we have the volcanic eruptions that expel matter that can devastate large areas, and also the volcanic gases that are, or gases that are expelled to the atmosphere can cause pollution. Over time, on the other hand, this matter often becomes fertile soil for agriculture and encourages human settlement. We have a very good example here in Spain with the island of Lanzarote in the Canary Islands. And by the way, I think actually today there are some volcanic eruptions I think it's the Etna and the Krakatoa, if you can watch it on the news or in Google. Then we have the hurricanes, which are very strong winds with speeds of more than, with H, again the PowerPoint, of 120 kilometers per hour. Okay, I think every one of us have seen a hurricane. They are accompanied by torrential with an N here, torrential rain. Remember, torrential rain means very violent and intense rain within a short period of time, and can cause a lot of destruction with many victims. One of the most destructive hurricanes in recent years was the Katrina in the Caribbean Sea. I think it was like 15 years ago or 20 years ago. I cannot remember. But you can also look for that on YouTube. And then floods. Floods are inundaciones, which they occur when rainwater is not absorbed by rivers or the soil. Okay, so the water remains on the surface. It overflows and destroys. When there's flooding, it's because the river overflows to the surrounding area and destroys everything in its path. If the rainfall affects mountain slopes, pendientes, without vegetation, it can cause landslides. Landslides means that the land is moving, okay? What we call corrimientos de tierra, and mudslides, corrimientos de barro. And finally, human activity creates hazards that endanger people's lives and contribute to environmental imbalances. And most of the human hazards, or well, yes, human activity caused, the hazards caused by human activity are caused mostly by industries such as this one with these polluting gases. Then we are going to talk about urban ecosystems, because cities can be considered to be ecosystems on its own. However, unlike natural ecosystems, they are not balanced. Remember, the natural ecosystems are usually balanced because a city consumes more than, again with H, I don't know why PowerPoint does this to me. It is torturing me. Then it produces and generates waste, residuos, that it cannot absorb. And it can also change the weather. We are going to look about it. Cities produce a huge amount of waste. This is waste that needs to be processed or recycled. That's why you have garbage bins on your streets. Without separate collection and recycling, the waste accumulates in rubbish tips. This is a rubbish tips, what we call a vertedero. Also, if wastewater, the water that is polluted or is dirty, for example, when you flush your toilet, is not properly treated, it can pollute the subsoil and reach springs and rivers. This endangers wildlife and plants and can affect people's health. Okay, that's the reason why we have some water treatment plants in our country. Okay, there is one, for example, in next to where I live in Rivas. We have one of the Canal de Isabel II. And finally, cities alter the local climate. All of the buildings and activity that takes place within them, within the cities, create an urban microclimate. Okay, the cities have its own small climate. Why? Because cities are warmer than the suburbs. The suburbs, the outskirts, the outside of the cities. You have here this diagram, and you can see that the average difference between the city center, which should be this, and the suburbs, which is this, or this, is between 1 and 4 degrees centigrade. For example, if in the city center the temperature is about 33 degrees centigrade, in the suburbs it is around 4 degrees less. In this particular case, 29 degrees centigrade. And this phenomenon is called urban heat island effect. In Spanish, la isla de calor urbana. Besides the pollution produced by factories and vehicles, it's another feature of the urban climate, and this can create a dark, dense cloud over the city. For example, Madrid has this type of pollution cloud all over it, and you can search for images of this because it is called La Boina de Madrid. La Boina de Madrid is this polluting cloud that goes over the city. And now we are going to talk about specific environmental problems that affect the Earth ecosystem and its characteristics and in the measures taken to prevent them. So first, we are going to talk about floods. So when water levels in a river rise and overflow onto the surrounding land, it is called a flood. The localized risk of flooding is common in many parts of the world, and it is frequent in Spain. I am sure you have seen some floods in the news in the last years. Flooding, well, this is frequent in Spain because we have this Mediterranean climate in the eastern part with these torrential rains that happen, and they usually, well, or sometimes they overflow the rivers. Flooding is caused mainly by intense rain, but other factors add to the problem, such as deforestation, so the cutting of the trees, because the forest prevents water from being retained by the ground. Remember that the erosion of the soil, that the roots held the ground. So this is why it happens. And also paved surface. Paved surface are, for example, roads or highways that make the ground impermeable. Impermeable means that they don't allow the water to go through and unable to absorb the water. Also, the development of towns or agricultural activity and industries and services on the riverbanks. The riverbanks are the areas close or next to the river. Remember the Egyptian flooding? This is something similar. Makes the problem worse. Why? Because these areas are usually destroyed by the floods. This is an example of flooding, in which you can see that the water have almost destroyed the city. So there are some measures that can be taken to limit and prevent the damage caused by flooding. We have building reservoirs. Remember the reservoirs when we talk about the uses of the fresh water, embalses. Reforestation, flood barriers with a B, barriers, like this, for example, un dique, and legislation, the laws that the government can apply, for example, prohibiting the construction in areas close to the rivers are among the most effective ones, okay? For example, there was an important disaster caused by flooding in like 20 or 25 or 30 years ago. No, not 30, I think it's 20 years ago. The camping of Viescas in Huesca, which was built on a riverbank, and when a flood happened, it destroyed all of it and some people died, or many people died. The second environmental problem we are going to study is the acid rain. The accumulation of contaminants, of pollution in the atmosphere has several negative consequences for the environment, and one of these consequences is the acid rain. Why this happens? Because factories pollute the atmosphere here with these matters with large quantities of contaminants, gases and other chemicals. And if it rains here, when these contaminants are in the atmosphere, these contaminants fall with the rain. They fall to the ground with the rain and they damage the area. The most serious effect of acid rain is the ongoing destruction of forests. This is a forest affected by acid rain, and these vast areas of forest are disappearing as a result of this phenomenon. In recent years, the governments have introduced measures to protect the atmosphere at an international level, and to reduce the negative effects of gas emissions that cause pollution around the world. We will see that later with the Kyoto Protocol. However, they have not been very successful because these measures, they, how do you say this? They, well, they try to force the governments to close some industrial activities, and this is not very accepted by these governments and by the people. The third environmental problem that we're going to study is the greenhouse effect, el efecto invernadero. So, since the year 1900, the average temperature of the atmosphere has increased by 0.7 degrees centigrade, so the Earth is warming, and this warming is known as the greenhouse effect. It is causing changes to the Earth's climate that could be catastrophic. For example, well, if the average temperature of the planet rises, and the sea levels also rise. Why? Because the ice in the polar ice caps, it's going to, or is melting, okay, se está derritiendo, and also the glaciers are disappearing. Or, for example, on the other side, in the desertic areas, they are expanding, okay, they are growing bigger and bigger. So the greenhouse effect refers to the retention of the heat in the atmosphere due to the gas emissions of human activity. Why? Because these greenhouse gases, they accumulate in the atmosphere and they allow the solar radiation to enter the atmosphere, but they do not let the heat out, or at least they do not let all of the heat out. So the temperature in this area rises. Here you have a diagram in Spanish, which you can see here the solar radiation goes through the atmosphere, but some of this radiation, well, is reflected and goes back to space, but also part of it bounces and goes back and stays within the atmosphere. So the atmosphere temperature goes high, rises. The main greenhouse effects are carbon dioxide, which is produced by burning fuel, methane, which is produced by livestock agriculture and burning rubbish. Why livestock? Because many of the, how do you say this? Many of the cows' farts, los pedos de las vacas, they contain methane, so they contribute to this greenhouse effect. Then the water vapor, which comes from the evaporation of water in factories, for example these ones, and the respiration of living things, remember the transpiration for example, and fluorinated gases, which are the gases that contain fluor, which is produced in various industrial activities and in aerosols, okay, in sprays. Some countries have signed agreements and protocols to solve the problem of global warming, and the most important agreement is the Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto is a city of Japan, which was signed in the year 1997, which proposed limiting the amount of greenhouse gases that each country could produce. Some countries have followed this protocol and some countries have not. For example, China and the United States, which are the countries that produce the most contaminants, which is which is funny. The fourth environmental problem we are going to see is the forest fires. The forest fires, some of them are caused with a D by lightning. Okay, lightning in a storm. There are some lightnings, but most of them, lightning a rayo, but most of them are caused by people. They are intentional, and they are caused by people which have economic interests because they want to use the ground or the area that is occupying the forest for, I don't know, for agriculture or for building houses, for example, or also by pyromaniacs. A pyromaniac, un pirómano, is a people who has a mental disorder that wants to light up things, for example, the forest, because they like to watch the fire and they... So, forest fires are one of the biggest problems in the mountains in Spain. In recent decades, they have become more frequent and more severe. Every summer in Spain, there are several or hundreds of forest fires. Okay, they are very common in the Mediterranean area and also in Galicia. Some forests grow back in 15 or 20 years. They are more or less fast, okay? But, for example, the pine forests. But other species of trees take much longer. For example, the oaks, remember, los robles, which take up to 50 years to recover. Okay, this is why the forest fires are very important, because it takes a lot of time to recover from this disaster. There are some measures that can be taken to prevent and fight forest fires, like pruning, this which is la poda, the clearing of vegetation, el desbroce, weeding, que es quitar la maleza, and maintaining firewalls that that protect forested areas. I hate PowerPoint. This is a firewall, okay? It's an area, usually in a line, that is cleared from trees. So, for example, imagine that a fire is or happens in this part of the forest, and it will not spread to this area. Why? Because here it is a barrier, it is a firewall. That is, for example, why the Windows antivirus, it is called Windows Firewall, because it prevents the viruses to come to your computer, to get into your computer. Also, specialized workers like forest brigades are very helpful. The forest brigades are the people that takes care of the forest. In Spain, we call them guardias forestales or retenes. Sorry. The fifth environmental problems is a very specific problem, which is very curious, which is the disappearing of the Aral Sea. The Aral Sea, it's an inland sea which is located here in Central Asia. And the diversion is the change of the path, okay? El desvío of rivers flowing into it has caused the desiccation and desertification of the area. Why this happened? Because in order to develop irrigated crops in the Central Asian desert in the 1960s by the Soviet Union, the water from the rivers Amu Darya and Sir Darya, which is this one and this one, which end in the Aral Sea, was diverted to this area of crops. So this meant that the rivers no longer carried water into this Aral Sea. And its level, the water level, began to fall. So the Aral Sea started to empty. The surface of the Aral Sea has shrunk to make it smaller by 60%, and the water volume without an end, has shrunk by 80%. Okay, this is a picture, a satellite picture of the Aral Sea, in 1990. 10 years later, look at the area, has shrunk a lot, and in the year 2014, this is the shape of the look that it has nowadays. So the ecosystems of the Aral Sea have virtually collapsed due to the high salinity. Okay, it's a sea, so it has salt in its water. So if we take out the water, the salt remains. So the salinity increases. The salt and other toxic products are carried by the wind to inhabited areas and cause cancer or lung disease. The two lungs. Many cities have lost their ports and fishing industries due to the disappearance of the sea. Look at this. This used to be the Aral Sea, and now it's a desertic area. And here you have some boats that we cannot use anymore. So the investment into improved irrigation systems, the planting of vegetation, and the installation of desalination plants are some of the measures taken to recover the Aral Sea. It has recovered in recent years a bit, but there is still a lot of work to do. The sixth environmental problem is deforestation. The deforestation is the disappearing of forest areas, and this happens for many reasons. For example, economic interests, to cut down the trees, to use the wood for furniture, or to the paper industry, for example, the excessive consumption of wood because of these reasons, the industrial activity, and the overexploitation of the ecosystems. For example, I think this is part of Brazil in the Amazonas, and they cut down the trees because the trees, the wood of these trees is very appreciated, and they use this area which is clear for agriculture. So the consequences of deforestation are the erosion of the soil, the loss with two S's of biodiversity, the intensification of the greenhouse effect, because as you know, the plants, in order to live, they do the photosynthesis, which is the transformation of the carbon dioxide of the atmosphere into oxygen that is taken back to the atmosphere. So without the trees, the greenhouse effect intensifies, and the destruction of the natural landscapes. Okay, this landscape is being destroyed, or look at this one. However, the effects of the deforestation could be reversed, okay, taken back by reforestation, by imposing limits on farmland, preventing the people to cultivate in all these areas, and avoiding indiscriminate logging. Logging is the cutting down of trees, la tala. And finally, well, no, not finally, another problem is overfishing, la sobrepesca. The overfishing is very dangerous for marine ecosystems because the technology with an H here, used by fishing boats, means that we can find fish in places that we could not reach before. For example, they use radar to discover or to search for fishing banks. Marine species cannot reproduce fast enough to replace all the fish that are caught. This means that there are more fish being fished or being caught than the ones that are being born. Okay, so if we fish, I don't know, 1,000 fishes and they are only born 500, so we have a problem because the population is going to decrease. Also, the techniques used in fishing endanger marine biodiversity. For example, deep sea trolling. Trolling means to pull a big net in the deep sea, so it catches a lot of fishes, and it results in young fish and species such as turtles, mammals, and marine birds getting trapped in these nets. Here you have an example. This is a big net which is troll in the deep sea, and this is what usually happens with this technique, that many animals are being caught. For example, this poor turtle, sad turtle. And finally, the last environmental problems are the oil spills, los vertidos de petróleo. Why? Because the oil is one of the most commonly transported natural resources. It is transported primarily by sea. The other way is by oil. How do you say this? Let me check it. By pipelines. That was the word that I was looking for. A pipeline is an oleoducto. But most of it is transported by sea in specific type of ships, which are called oil tankers, petroleros. The oil tankers are specific ships designed to transport crude oil and oil products such as gasoline or diesel, or I don't know, fuel oil or asphalt and many other things. Today, we have double-hulled boats, okay, which are safer than the boats which were used at first, which are single-hulled ships, because they reduce the risk of spillage in the case of a collision or accident. Okay, this is a boat looking in the front, This is an oil tanker, and the hull is this part of the sea which I am pointing with my mouse, okay? Is the part of the sea, the bottom part of the ship, which goes underwater. So if there is a collision or an accident and there is a hole opened in the hull, the oil will spill to the sea. But if we design this type of boats which have a double hull, if the first hull is damaged, the oil will not spill. Sometimes it will because the damage will affect both hulls, but at least we are reducing the risk. So there have been many in the 20th century, many oil spills, and one of the worst oil spills have been the Exxon Valdez one, which is the most famous. It was here in Alaska in the year 1989. And in Spain, we also had an important one, which was the Prestige in Galicia in 2002. This is an image of the oil spill in Galicia. The oil reached the coast, the beaches, and this is what happens. Okay, this this affects the ecosystem, the people, and also the animals. Many more oil spills have happened during the 70s and the 80s, and you have here a map in which are shown the most important ones. And that's it for this lesson. Let's make some magic again. Y esto ha sido todo, ¿vale? Este es el último tema del libro y es el último tema del curso, ¿vale? Es un tema que no es excesivamente complicado, pero sí que hay que saberse más o menos cuáles son los principales tipos de problemas ambientales. Así pues, hemos terminado con los vídeos teóricos, ¿vale? Ya no vamos a dar más teoría en lo poquito que queda de curso. Así que esto ha sido todo. Muchas gracias si habéis visto el vídeo, espero que os haya ayudado y pues no sé si nos veremos en algún otro vídeo. Espero que sí, pero ya veremos qué ocurre. Muchas gracias y adiós.